The nightclub smelled like cigarettes and expensive perfume. It was 1946. Havana, the Tropicana. Outside, the Cuban air was thick and warm. Inside, the room was darker, cooler, filled with the kind of people who didn't give their real names. Frank Sinatra sat at a small table near the back. He was 30 years old, thin, sharp cheekbones, blue eyes that looked tired even when he smiled. He wore a cream-colored suit that cost more than most people made in a month. His tie was loose. A glass of Jack Daniels sat in front of him, untouched. Across the room at a larger table surrounded by men in dark suits sat Lucky Luciano. He was 49 years old, shorter than Sinatra, thicker. His face was weathered, scarred. One eyelid drooped from an old knife wound. He wore a white linen suit, and a fedora tilted back on his head. He was smoking a cigar, listening to something one of his men was whispering. The two men hadn't acknowledged each other. Not openly. But everyone in that room knew they were connected. Not by choice, not by friendship, by something more complicated. By history, by necessity, by the strange mathematics of fame and power in a world where both could get you killed. A woman in a red dress walked to the microphone on the small stage. The band behind her started playing. Slow. A Cuban rhythm mixed with American jazz. She sang in Spanish. Her voice was beautiful, but no one was really listening. They were watching, waiting. Sinatra took a sip of his drink. He didn't look at Luciano. But he knew Luciano was watching him. He could feel it. This wasn't the first time they'd been in the same room. It wouldn't be the last. But it was the first time it mattered. The first time people were starting to ask questions. The first time the silence between them became louder than anything either of them could say. Sinatra had grown up in Hoboken, New Jersey. His father was a firefighter. His mother ran numbers for the local bookies. The neighborhood was Italian, Irish. Everyone knew everyone, and everyone knew the rules. You didn't talk to cops. You didn't trust outsiders. You took care of your own. Sinatra learned to sing in school, not because anyone encouraged him, because it got him attention. Girls noticed him. Boys stopped picking on him. Teachers remembered his name. By the time he was 20, he was singing in clubs, small places, roadhouses, anywhere that would let him on stage. He had a voice that didn't sound like anyone else. Smooth, controlled, like he was telling you a secret. But singing didn't pay. Not at first. So he took other jobs. Deliveries, errands, things he didn't talk about later. He met people, connected people, men who could get you work if you did them a favor. Men who remembered loyalty. Men like Lucky Luciano. Luciano had grown up on the Lower East Side of Manhattan. His parents were from Sicily. His father worked the docks. His mother took in laundry. There were 5 children, not enough food, not enough heat in the winter. Luciano learned early that the law wasn't there to protect people like him. It was there to control them, to keep them poor, to keep them quiet. So he stopped being quiet. He ran errands for the local gangsters, delivered packages, collected debts. By the time he was 15, he was earning more than his father. By the time he was 25, he was organizing, not just stealing, not just extorting, building, creating systems, turning chaos into commerce. He didn't do it alone. He worked with Meyer Lansky, Bugsy Siegel, Frank Costello. Together, they turned crime into a business. Efficient, profitable, national. Luciano became the most powerful mobster in America, not through violence alone, through intelligence, through the ability to see what others couldn't. That cooperation was more profitable than war. That power came from structure, not chaos. But power made you visible, and visibility made you a target. In 1936, the government charged him with running a prostitution ring. The evidence was shaky. The witnesses were coerced. But it didn't matter. They wanted him gone. He was sentenced to 30 to 50 years. Sent to prison. Clinton Correctional in upstate New York. The empire he'd built didn't collapse. It just went quiet. Operated from the shadows. Controlled by men who visited him in prison and followed his instructions. Then came the war. World War II. The government needed help. The docks were being sabotaged. German U-boats were sinking ships off the Atlantic coast. They needed intelligence. They needed control of the waterfront. They needed Luciano. He made a deal. He'd help secure the docks. Help prepare for the invasion of Sicily. In exchange, they'd reconsider his sentence. He did what they asked. The docks stayed secure. The invasion succeeded. In 1946, they released him. But they didn't let him stay. They deported him, sent him back to Italy, told him he could never return to the United States, so he went to Cuba instead, close enough to watch, to manage, to stay connected. And that's where Sinatra found him. Sinatra had become famous during the war. While soldiers were dying overseas, he was singing to screaming girls in New York and Los Angeles. The press called them Bobby Soxers, teenagers who fainted at his concerts, who tore at his clothes, who made him the biggest star in America. But fame came with questions. Why wasn't he fighting? Why was he performing while others were dying? The answer was a perforated eardrum, a medical exemption, legitimate. But it didn't matter. People whispered. People doubted. People said he had connections, that someone had pulled strings, and maybe someone had. Maybe someone in Hoboken who remembered the kid who used to run errands. Maybe someone who saw value in having a famous singer owe you a favor. Sinatra never said. He never confirmed. He never denied. He just kept singing. By 1946, his career was starting to slip. The war was over. The soldiers were home. The girls who'd screamed for him were getting married, having children, moving on. His records weren't selling like they used to. His concerts weren't selling out. He needed a reset, a break, a chance to remind people why they'd loved him in the first place. So he went to Havana, to perform, to relax, to be seen in the right places with the right people. And that's when the photographs started. A journalist got a tip. Sinatra was in Havana, staying at the Hotel Nacional, seen at the Tropicana, seen at private parties, seen with Lucky Luciano. The journalist started asking questions. Who invited him? Why was he there? What was he doing with a deported mobster? The story broke in February 1947. Sinatra was photographed carrying a suitcase through the Havana airport. The headline suggested he was delivering money. A bagman for the mob. Sinatra denied it. Said the suitcase was full of razors, gifts for his Cuban friends. A ridiculous explanation that made things worse. The scandal grew. Columnists wrote about it. Gossip shows talked about it. The FBI started watching him, more closely than they already were. And through it all, Luciano said nothing. He didn't defend Sinatra. Didn't deny knowing him. Didn't confirm anything. He just stayed in Cuba, smoking cigars, running his empire from a distance. Because that was the deal. The unspoken agreement between men like Luciano and men like Sinatra. Silence was protection, for both of them. If Luciano admitted the connection, Sinatra's career would end. If Sinatra admitted the connection, Luciano's operations would be exposed. So they stayed silent. Not out of loyalty, out of necessity. Sinatra returned to the United States in March. He held a press conference, denied everything. Said he barely knew Luciano. Said he was in Havana to perform. Nothing more. The reporters didn't believe him. But they couldn't prove anything. Not really, just photographs, rumors, suspicions. His career continued to decline. His voice started to fail. Nodes on his vocal cords. Stress. Exhaustion. By 1950, he couldn't hit the high notes anymore. His record label dropped him. His talent agency dropped him. His wife left him. He was broke, forgotten, washed up at 35. But he didn't disappear. He fought. He took small roles in movies. He begged for a chance. In 1953, he got one. A supporting role in From Here to Eternity. He took a massive pay cut just to be in it. He won the Academy Award for Best Supporting Actor. The comeback was instant, sudden, total. Within 2 years, he was bigger than he'd ever been. Records, movies, television. He became untouchable, the chairman of the board, the voice. And through it all, he never spoke about Luciano again. Luciano stayed in exile. Cuba. Italy. Always moving. Always one step ahead of the law. He ran his empire quietly, efficiently, without drawing attention. He died in 1960. Heart attack. Naples Airport. He was waiting to meet a journalist who was writing his biography. He collapsed, gone before the ambulance arrived. The funeral was small. A few family members, a few old associates. No one famous, no one who wanted to be photographed. Sinatra didn't attend, didn't send flowers, didn't make a statement. But a week later, he was in a recording studio, singing a song he'd sung 100 times before, My Way. The engineers noticed something different. The way he sang the line, regrets. I've had a few. The weight in his voice. The pause before the next line. They asked if he wanted to do another take. He said no. It was right. Over the years, journalists kept asking about Havana, about Luciano, about the suitcase, about the rumors. Sinatra's answers were always the same. Vague. Dismissive. Sometimes angry. I went to Havana to perform. I met a lot of people. I don't remember everyone I shook hands with. When pressed harder, he'd get mean. You calling me a liar? You got proof? Then shut up. The FBI kept a file on him. Thousands of pages. Surveillance, phone taps, witness statements. None of it proved anything. Just associations, friendships, conversations. In 1972, a congressional committee called him to testify. They wanted to know about his mob connections, his relationship with organized crime figures. He showed up, angry, defiant. He denied everything, said he knew people. That didn't make him a criminal. I'm a singer, he said. I sing for a living. I don't choose who sits in the audience. The committee didn't push. They had nothing concrete, just decades of smoke and no fire they could prove. Sinatra walked out. He never spoke about it again. He died in 1998, 82 years old. The funeral was massive. Presidents attended, celebrities, thousands of fans lining the streets. The eulogies praised his voice, his talent, his generosity, his contributions to music and culture. No one mentioned Lucky Luciano. No one mentioned Havana. No one mentioned the suitcase, because by then, it didn't matter. Or maybe it had never mattered. Not in the way people thought. The connection between Sinatra and Luciano wasn't about crime. Not really. It was about survival. About two men from immigrant neighborhoods who understood that the world didn't give you anything. That you took what you could. That you protected yourself and the people who helped you. Sinatra didn't become a mobster. Luciano didn't become a singer. They just existed in the same space for a moment. Two kinds of power learning from each other. Fame taught crime how to be invisible, how to smile for cameras, how to make people love you while you took everything they had. Crime taught fame how to survive, how to stay quiet when it mattered, how to protect yourself from the people who wanted to destroy you. And the silence between them, that was the agreement. The thing that kept them both alive, both successful, both untouchable. Because the moment one of them spoke, the other would fall. So they never did. Not in Havana, not in prison, not in congressional hearings, not even when it might have helped. They just carried their secrets to the grave and left the rest of us guessing. That's the real story. Not what happened in that nightclub in 1946, but what didn't happen, what was never said, what was never confirmed, what was protected by mutual silence. Two men, two kinds of power, one understanding that in a world where everyone wants